My parents gave me 10 minutes, just 10, to pack 17 years of my life into a suitcase. They told everyone I was off to study abroad. The real story? I was pregnant, homeless, and scrubbed clean from the family history before the pregnancy test dried. Now it's been 20 years, and here they are, standing in my son's hospital lobby, hungry for a slice of the legacy they wanted gone. The woman who rescued me left behind a will, and it's about to turn their gold-plated dreams into lead. The living room always reeked of expensive sandalwood and old money, but that night in October 2004, the air felt thin, like somebody had punched a hole in the sky and let out all the oxygen. I stood shaking, white-knuckled around that stupid plastic stick, the one positive that shattered everything. "You're lying," Mom shot out. Her voice, cold and sharp, stung more than a slap. She didn't even look at me, her eyes locked on my waist instead. No daughter of mine would be so common. Dad stayed silent. Yelling was beneath him. He just checked his Patek Philippe, as if my little crisis was a tedious appointment he couldn't reschedule. Then he got up, walked to my room, and brought back my suitcase, the designer one. He set it by the front door, making sure not a hair was out of place. "You have 10 minutes, he said, twisting his Yale ring. "Take what fits, leave your keys." "Dad, please." "You're not our daughter anymore." He reached up, flipped our family portrait face down. All those white shirts, all those fake smiles. Our daughter wouldn't torch everything we built over some boy's mistake. Mom didn't even look away from her manicure. "Don't call, don't come back. We'll tell everyone you're studying abroad." Ralph, the boy who swore he'd never leave me, had already blocked my number. His future mattered more than my existence. So 10 minutes, after 17 years, I grabbed random clothes, my grandmother's necklace, and the $227 I'd hidden away. The door's lock snapped shut behind me, a sound that's stuck with me ever since. I spent 3 nights under the gazebo in Riverside Park. By the 4th morning, I woke up to a cold nose pressed to my shoulder. I opened my eyes, and there she was, a greyhound, tall, sleek, eyes like she could see right through the ache in my bones. "Lulu, come back here," someone called. A woman, maybe in her 70s. She wore a cashmere coat, looked at me the way you look at someone you recognize after a long time. Not pity, just recognition. "Child," she said, resting her wrinkled hand on Lulu's neck, "you're going to freeze out here." She looked at my face, then my belly. I wasn't showing, not really, but she knew. When I finally caved and started sobbing, the full, ugly kind, she didn't flinch. She just held me, right there on that cold bench, like I was worth holding together. "Come on," she said, "Lulu and I need company for breakfast." Her car smelled like lavender and old leather. She drove to a house so big it looked like a library with bedrooms. "I lost my daughter," she said, guiding me inside. "Car crash, 5 years ago. She was pregnant too." That morning is when my real life started. If this story's getting to you, go ahead, like or subscribe. Tell me where you're from, what time it is while you're reading this. Leave a comment, let's talk. Growing up on Claire's estate felt like living in a world built from dusty books, stained glass, and a kind of dignity that always spoke in whispers. My parents loved to brag to their country club friends that I was studying in Switzerland. The truth? Way messier. I was running myself ragged with double shifts as a hostess at Claire's restaurant downtown, learning about profit margins and inventory when the sun was up, then cramming for my degree after midnight. But my son, Tony, he never went through any of it alone. Lulu, the silver greyhound, shadowed him everywhere. By age 5, Tony couldn't care less about toy cars. He borrowed Claire's embroidery silk to suture his stuffed animal's torn limbs. Lulu would lie nearby, her head on her paws, following every motion of his hands with an intensity that made it look like she knew he was saving lives. Claire would lean over, her voice soft and steady. "He's got a surgeon's hands and a lion's heart, Michelle. Don't ever let the world or those people make him feel small." Tony smashed every expectation. He left high school behind at 16. Medical school? He ran through it like he was chasing something only he could see. I still remember the morning the Springfield Gazette landed on our doorstep. 20-year-old prodigy becomes youngest chief of cardiac surgery in state history.
Tony was on the front page, standing taller than I thought possible. He looked like a Davies, the name Claire kept alive in him, but he walked with the grace she'd taught him. Dr. Tony Davies, the name my parents spent 20 years trying to erase, is now written in bold, respected by the whole city. That afternoon, my phone rang. The number was familiar even after 20 years. "Michelle, it's Mom." Her voice was wrapped in that same smooth, practiced silk. "We saw the story about our grandson. Remarkable. We think it's time to leave the unfortunate misunderstandings behind us. A family should stand together for such a legacy," she added. Lulu leaned against my leg, letting out a deep, soft sigh. Even the dog could feel the air change. "He isn't your grandson," I answered. For once, my voice didn't tremble. "He's a man you've never bothered to meet." "Don't be difficult," Dad barked in the background. "He's a Davies. That name belongs to us, and it's time he took his rightful place in the family business." They didn't want the boy I raised, with paper stars taped to the nursery walls. They wanted the prodigy turned asset, the headline star. And honestly, they had no idea. Claire had spent 20 years turning us into people who didn't need them anymore.
Springfield Memorial's lobby looked like a cathedral, marble everywhere, glass catching the sun, the whole space designed to calm the rich and spook everyone else. I stood by the reception desk, Lulu pressed against my leg. She was a slim, silver shadow, the only thing keeping me breathing. And then the glass doors opened, and in walked the pieces of a past I thought I'd burned. My mother moved like she'd stepped out of a snow globe, untouched by 20 years of weather or regret. Her Chanel suit was perfect. Dad strode in beside her, eyes ahead, chin raised, looking for cameras. He didn't even glance at me. He wanted to be seen, not to see. "We're here for the chief of surgery," he said, his voice booming. "We're the Daves Industries." Mom's eyes finally found me. No hug, no smile, just a quick readjustment of her pearls. "Michelle, looks like you've managed so far, but really, this place? Our grandson deserves better than some city hospital." I didn't even blink. "This is the best cardiac wing in the country, Mom, because Tony built it." The side door opened and Tony stepped out. Scrubs, stethoscope, hair a little messy, but he looked solid, in command. He stopped short when he saw the strangers in his lobby. Lulu perked up and moved to him, her tail swishing in a slow, measured beat. He scratched her ears without even looking down. Dad strode up, working that smile he used for magazine covers. He pulled out a velvet box and popped it open. "A Patek Philippe," he said, "the 5270J, call it a token for all the time we lost." Tony didn't even look at the watch. He looked at the Yale-class ring on Dad's hand, the same ring that had pointed toward the door 20 years ago. "I don't take gifts from patients' families," Tony said, his voice flat, "and definitely not from strangers." Mom gasped. "Strangers? Tony, we're your family. Where do you think your talent comes from? Dave's Industries needs you." Tony stepped right into Dad's space. "Mom told me how you turned our family portrait to the wall. She told me you gave her 10 minutes to pack." He didn't flinch. "You left us in the dirt. You don't get to show up and reap what you tried to root out." Dad's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You're making a big mistake," he hissed. "We have influence here. The board listens to us." "Then you can discuss it with them," Tony said. "I have a life to save." He turned and disappeared down the hall, Lulu trailing right after him like a silver ghost. Mom turned her icy stare back at me. "You've turned him against us, Michelle, but this isn't over. We have rights, and we have Ralph." Ralph, the boy who blocked my number at the gazebo. My past wasn't done with me yet, and neither was the war for my son. After everyone left, the silence felt thick. The only sound was Lulu's nails tapping on the marble floor as we made our way to the exit. My mind couldn't keep still. Ralph. For 20 years, he'd been nothing but a faded memory, a kid who chose Stanford over his own family. Now, hearing Mom say his name, it felt like getting left behind all over again. "They're desperate, Michelle," Lance said.
He was waiting for me at the entrance, papers scattered on his lap. He saw how pale I was and steadied me. They tracked Ralph down. He's here in the city, and he's filed a paternal recognition petition. After all this time, I whispered, he never even wrote back when I was living in shelters. He's out of money, Lance said, his jaw tightening. His tech company went under, massive tax lien. Your parents want him to play the grieving father so they can get more leverage on Tony. The drive back to Claire's estate felt endless. Lulu pressed her head to my shoulder from the back seat, grounding me. When we got inside, the house felt less like a home and more like a fortress you'd barricade yourself in. Lance led me to Claire's study. From the wall safe, he pulled out a thick leather folder. He saw this coming, he said, flipping to a page sealed in gold. She didn't just give you the restaurants and the house, she left a character clause in the trust. He pointed at Claire's strong handwriting. Should any biological party who previously renounced, abandoned, or legally severed ties with Michelle Daves or her offspring attempt to claim kinship for financial gain, they are hereby barred from any association with the estate assets. Wait, there's more, Lance said. She recorded a video for when things got ugly. She wanted you to play it if they ever turned into vultures. Before I could see it, someone started pounding on the door, not a gentle knock, wild, urgent, like they thought they belonged inside. I peeked through the window. Ralph stood on the porch in a wrinkled suit. He looked older, life had done its job, but his eyes hadn't changed, still that same cowardly flicker from 20 years ago. "Michelle, open up," he yelled. "He's my son, I have a right." Lulu stayed planted by the door, her ears flat, growling low, a sound I'd never heard from her. She wasn't hiding anymore, she was guarding us. "Don't go out there," Lance said. "I have to," I replied, ice in my voice. "He needs to see what he left behind before I show him exactly what Claire left him." I opened the door. Ralph stepped forward, forcing a shaky smile. "Michelle, you look incredible. I've thought about that night every day." "Stop," I said. "You didn't think about us when the hospital bills piled up. You're only here because Mom and Dad promised to pay your debts." His smile crumbled. That desperate look became something raw, mean. "I'm his father, Michelle. The court will recognize that. DNA doesn't lie." "No," I replied, letting him take in the grandeur of the house and Lulu's looming presence. "DNA doesn't lie, but signatures do. Claire made sure the one you gave back in 2004 never goes away." The air on the porch was thick with Ralph's expensive, desperate cologne. He tried to step past me into the foyer, his eyes darting at the marble floors and the original oil paintings. Lulu didn't move. She planted herself firmly in the doorway, a silver barrier that forced him to stop in his tracks. "You can't keep me out, Michelle," Ralph said, his voice rising with a frantic edge. "Your parents, they've already retained a family law firm for me. They said if I establish paternity, we can nullify whatever charity case setup you've got going here. We're his real family." "Family?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through his shouting. "You weren't family when I was sleeping on a park bench, Ralph. You weren't family when I was counting pennies for milk." Lance stepped forward, holding a yellowed, thin piece of paper. It looked fragile, but in the legal world it was a guillotine. "Mr. Blake," Lance said, his tone professional and cold, "do you remember October 15th, 2004, the day before Michelle was kicked out?" Ralph blinked, his bravado flickering. I was 18, I was scared. My parents made me." "Your parents didn't just make you block her number, they made you sign this." He held up a copy of a relinquishment of parental rights and responsibilities. I stared at the document. I had never seen it before.
My breath caught as I saw Ralph's shaky teenage signature at the bottom, witnessed by a notary. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Claire didn't just find me in the park, she had investigated us. She went to your parents' house weeks after I moved in with her, I said. Your father was so eager to wash his hands of the pregnancy scandal that he gave her the original document you'd signed just to make sure he'd never hear from me again. Ralph's face went pale. That was signed under duress. I was a minor. It won't hold up. It's been 20 years, Ralph, Lance said. You never contested it, and according to the in perpetuity clause Claire added to her own will, this document acts as a permanent bar. You didn't just give up a baby, you legally declared that Tony does not exist to you. But Mom and Dad said, Mom and Dad are using you, I snapped. They don't want a family reunion, they want a PR win for Dave's Industries. They're paying your debts because they think you're a key, but you're just a ghost, Ralph, and ghosts can't sue for custody. Lulu let out a short, sharp bark, the final period on my sentence. Ralph backed away, stumbling down the porch steps. He looked toward the black sedan waiting at the end of the driveway, likely my parents' driver, and realized the key he thought he held had just snapped in the lock. The air on the porch was thick with Ralph's expensive, desperate cologne. He tried to step past me into the foyer, his eyes darting at the marble floors and the original oil paintings. Lulu didn't move. She planted herself firmly in the doorway, a silver barrier that forced him to stop in his tracks. "You can't keep me out, Michelle," Ralph said, his voice rising with a frantic edge. "Your parents, they've already retained a family law firm for me. They said if I establish paternity, we can nullify whatever charity case setup you've got going here. We're his real family." "Family?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through his shouting. "You weren't family when I was sleeping on a park bench, Ralph. You weren't family when I was counting pennies for milk." Lance stepped forward, holding a yellowed, thin piece of paper. It looked fragile, but in the legal world it was a guillotine. "Mr. Blake," Lance said, his tone professional and cold, "do you remember October 15th, 2004, the day before Michelle was kicked out?" Ralph blinked, his bravado flickering. I was 18. I was scared. My parents made me." "Your parents didn't just make you block her number. They made you sign this." He held up a copy of a relinquishment of parental rights and responsibilities. I stared at the document. I had never seen it before. My breath caught as I saw Ralph's shaky teenage signature at the bottom, witnessed by a notary. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Claire didn't just find me in the park, she had investigated us. "She went to your parents' house weeks after I moved in with her," I said. "Your father was so eager to wash his hands of the pregnancy scandal that he gave her the original document you'd signed just to make sure he'd never hear from me again." Ralph's face went pale. That was signed under duress. I was a minor. It won't hold up." "It's been 20 years, Ralph," Lance said. "You never contested it, and according to the in perpetuity clause Claire added to her own will, this document acts as a permanent bar. You didn't just give up a baby, you legally declared that Tony does not exist to you." "But Mom and Dad said, Mom and Dad are using you," I snapped. "They don't want a family reunion, they want a PR win for Dave's Industries. They're paying your debts because they think you're a key, but you're just a ghost, Ralph, and ghosts can't sue for custody." Lulu let out a short, sharp bark, the final period on my sentence. Ralph backed away, stumbling down the porch steps. He looked toward the black sedan waiting at the end of the driveway, likely my parents' driver, and realized the key he thought he held had just snapped in the lock. The estate felt peaceful, right up until my phone started going wild. No calls, just notifications stacking up one after another. Mom and Dad didn't bother waiting for a legal answer. They took everything straight to social media.
One link jumped out, a local news video with the headline, "The Forgotten Grandparents, Dave's Industries, Legacy Denied." There was Mom wiping her tears with a museum-grade handkerchief by the hospital fountain. Dad stood beside her, somber and dignified. They looked perfect. They looked like victims. "We just want to know our grandson," Mom told the reporter, her voice trembling just enough. 20 years ago, there was a misunderstanding, a typical teenage rebellion, but being kept away from Dr. Tony Daves, a man with our blood, it's breaking our hearts. And then the camera shifted to Ralph. He hovered in the background, looking coached. "I was young and scared," he said, "but I'm here now. I want to be the father Tony deserves. Michelle is clinging to a 20-year-old grudge." By the time I got to the hospital, the place was a circus. News vans everywhere, reporters shoving microphones at anyone in scrubs. "Doctor, why won't you let your own dad see you work?" I found Tony in the surgical lounge, eyes locked on the television. Lulu sat curled under the bench, glancing up at me with tired, knowing eyes. "They've turned my workplace into a sideshow," Tony said, his voice sharp and low. "I had to postpone a valve replacement because a cameraman tried to sneak into the OR. Take your golden doodle everywhere you go, as in, literally everywhere." "They want you to snap, Tony," I said. "If you look cold, they win." Lance walked in, looking grim. "The hospital admin just called. Milton made a generous donation to the new wing this morning, but only if he can have a private family meeting on hospital grounds tomorrow. They're literally buying their way in." Tony got up, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles turned white. Lulu rose with him, pressing against his leg, a silver shadow of support. "Let them have their meeting," Tony said. There was a coldness in his eyes I'd never seen before. "But we'll do it out in the open, where everyone can watch." "Tony, what are you thinking?" I asked. He glanced at the TV, catching Dad shaking hands with a reporter. "They want a public reconciliation. Fine. We'll give them a statement no one will forget. Lance, bring the video Claire recorded. Mom, grab the suitcase." The 10-minute suitcase. I'd kept it buried in Claire's attic for 20 years. Now, finally, it was time to show the world what family legacy really meant to the Daves.
The fallout from the hospital lobby was instant. By the next morning, the video of the scuffed suitcase had gone viral, and the Daves Industries stock was plummeting. But Dad wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who would burn the house down if he couldn't own it. I was in the kitchen at Claire's estate, pouring coffee when Tony walked in. He looked hollowed out. He wasn't wearing his scrubs. He was holding a formal envelope embossed with the state medical board's seal. "They did it, Mom," Tony said, his voice strangely flat. "They filed a formal complaint. They're alleging medical malpractice and unethical conduct during my last pediatric heart surgery." My heart dropped. "That's impossible. You saved that little girl's life." "It doesn't matter," Tony replied, sitting heavily at the table. Lulu immediately moved to his side, resting her slender chin on his knee, her tail giving one slow, sympathetic thump against the floor. "Dad used his board connections. They're claiming I moved too fast, that I bypassed safety protocols. They've suspended my surgical privileges." Lance burst through the front door, his laptop already open. "It's a setup. The anonymous witness who flanned the procedure, it's Ralph. He's claiming he was in the observation gallery and saw you act recklessly." "Ralph doesn't know a scalpel from a butter knife," I shouted. "He doesn't have to," Lance said. "He just has to create enough doubt to drag Tony through a public hearing. If Tony is under investigation, he can't be the face of the new Rossi Foundation. It freezes everything, the funding, the scholarships, the legacy." Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang, a slow, deliberate chime. I opened it to find Mom standing alone. She looked like a grieving mother, though I knew it was likely the work of a clever makeup artist. "Michelle," she whispered. "Please, talk to your father. He's distraught. He feels like Tony has been brainwashed against his own heritage." "Distraught?" I laughed. "He just tried to end Tony's career." "It doesn't have to be this way," Mom said, stepping closer. "If Tony makes a public statement, just a small one, saying the suitcase story was an exaggeration, Milton will drop the complaint. He can make the investigation vanish in an hour." I looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't a mother, she was a negotiator for a hostile takeover. "You're asking me to let my son lie to protect the man who threw his mother into the street?" "I'm asking you to save his career," she snapped, the mask finally slipping. "Do you want him to be a hero with no license, or a Daves with a future? Choose wisely, Michelle, because by Monday, the board will make their decision final." She turned and walked back to her car. I stood in the doorway, trembling with rage. Lulu let out a low, mournful howl, sensing the weight of the threat. I went back inside to find Tony and Lance in the study. They weren't looking at medical books, they were looking at Claire's old business ledgers. "We aren't choosing either option, Mom," Tony said, looking up with fierce clarity. "We're going to find the one person Dad can't buy, the mother of the girl I saved."
The drive to the outskirts of the city was quiet, the only sound being the soft panting of Lulu from the back seat. We weren't heading to a boardroom or a lawyer's office. We were looking for Mrs. Gable, the mother of the 7-year-old girl Tony had operated on just 48 hours prior. "If she's been intimidated by Dad's legal team, she might not even open the door," I said, my hands tight on the steering wheel. "She saw me save her daughter, Mom," Tony replied, his eyes fixed on the road. "She knows the truth." We pulled up to a modest brick house. When the door opened, Mrs. Gable didn't look like a woman who had been bought. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept in a week. "Dr. Daves?" she gasped. "I saw the news. They're saying you put my Lily at risk." Tony dropped into that calm, clinical tone that had comforted hundreds of families. "Mrs. Gable, you were there. You saw the monitors. Did I ever once seem reckless to you?" She looked down, her lip trembling. "2 men in dark suits came by yesterday. They offered to pay for Lily's entire recovery, rehab, home nursing, college funds, if I signed a statement saying I felt pressured into the surgery. They said you were chasing a record, not saving a child." My blood ran cold. Dad hadn't just filed a complaint, he was bribing a grieving mother to commit perjury. "And did you sign it?" I asked. Mrs. Gable looked at Tony, then at Lulu, who had gently approached and rested her head on the woman's hand. The dog's presence seemed to break the tension. "I told them to get off my porch," she whispered. "I told them I'd rather go into debt for the rest of my life than lie about the man who gave my daughter back to me." "Will you tell the board that?" Lance asked, stepping up with a recorder. "Will you tell them about the bribe?" "I'll tell anyone who will listen," she said firmly. We spent hours documenting her testimony, but as we were leaving, my phone chimed with a news alert that made my stomach churn. Daves Industries announces strategic partnership with Medical Licensing Board Chairman. The photo showed Dad shaking hands with the very man who would preside over Tony's hearing on Monday. Dad wasn't just buying a witness, he was buying the judge. "He's closing the exits, Tony," I said. "He just needs the chairman to look the other way." Tony looked at the recording. "Then we don't go to the chairman, we go to the people who actually run that hospital. Lance, the whistleblower fund Claire set up for the staff 10 years ago, is it still active?" Lance nodded, a slow grin spreading across his face. $5 million specifically earmarked to protect any staff member who reports board-level corruption. Claire really did think of everything.
Monday morning arrived with a heavy, gray fog clinging to the windows of Claire's estate. Tony stood in the foyer, adjusting his tie. He wasn't wearing scrubs, he was wearing a sharp, charcoal suit. Lulu paced around his legs, her lean body trembling as if she could feel the electricity in the air. "The hearing starts in an hour," Lance said, checking his watch. "The chairman has already cleared the gallery. He's trying to keep this behind closed doors so no one hears Mrs. Gable's testimony." "He thinks he's presiding over a trial," Tony said, looking down at Lulu. "He doesn't realize he's presiding over a funeral for Dad's reputation." When we pulled up to the administrative wing, the scene was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. It wasn't just news vans. Hundreds of people were standing on the lawn, nurses in floral scrubs, janitors in gray, young residents with stethoscopes. They weren't shouting. They were a silent, solid wall of white and blue. As Tony stepped out, a path opened. Lulu walked at his side, her head held high like a silver sentinel. "Dr. Rossi, we're with you," a nurse shouted. "No more boardroom bullies." We entered the hearing room. Mom and Dad were already seated, looking smug. The chairman, a man with a face like sour milk, banged his gavel. "This is a private administrative hearing. Security, clear the hallways." "The hallways are cleared, Mr. Chairman," Tony said, his voice echoing with surgical precision. "The entire surgical staff just walked out. Not a single elective procedure is happening in this building, and they aren't coming back until the whistleblower fund Claire Rossi established investigates your strategic partnership with Dave's Industries." Dad's face went from smug to a bruised purple. "You're holding a hospital hostage for your ego. You'll never practice medicine again." "I'm not holding them hostage, Dad," Tony replied, leaning over the table. "They're protecting their own, something you wouldn't understand." Lance stepped forward and slapped a stack of documents onto the table. "We have the bank records, Mr. Chairman, the consulting fee Dave's Industries paid into your private offshore account. We also have the sworn testimony regarding the bribe offered to Mrs. Gable." "This is hearsay," the chairman sputtered, his hands shaking. "It's a felony," I added, "and it's currently being live-streamed to 50,000 people by the residents standing outside that door." Mom gripped her pearls so hard the string looked ready to snap. The Dave's name, which they had spent 40 years polishing, was tarnishing in real time. "We can settle this," Dad hissed. "We'll drop the complaint. Just tell them to go back to work." Tony looked at Lulu, who let out a sharp, decisive bark. "The only place you're going is the exit. The staff didn't walk out for a seat on the board. They walked out to see you removed from it, permanently."
The hearing room was no longer a sanctuary for Dad's influence. It had become a cage. The chairman, sensing the shift in the wind, didn't even bother to look at Mom as he signed the order to dismiss the complaint against Tony. Sacrifice was the only way for him to survive. "This is an outrage," Dad shouted, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table. "I built this wing. I fund this hospital." "You used to," Lance corrected, sliding a fresh set of documents across the table. "While you were busy trying to sabotage your grandson, the board of Dave's Industries held an emergency session. The stock has dropped 20% in 48 hours. Mom's hand flew to her throat, her knuckles white against her pearls. "They can't do that. Milton is the face of the company." "He was," I said, stepping forward. Lulu nudged my hand, her steady presence a sharp contrast to the panic in the room. "He's triggered the morality clause, Dad. You've been ousted, effective immediately." Dad's face went a sickly shade of gray. His phone buzzed with alerts. His corporate accounts were already frozen. Just then, the side door opened. Ralph was let in by security, looking smaller than ever.
He wouldn't even look me in the eye. "Mr. Blake has been cooperating," Lance said. "In exchange for leniency, he's turned over the recorded calls from Dad instructing him on how to pressure Michelle Gable." "You coward," Dad hissed at Ralph. "I was broke, Milton," Ralph yelled back. "You promised me a way out. You told me Michelle was the villain, but you're the ones who made sure he'd never be mine." Tony stood up, looking at the 3 people who shared his DNA, but none of his heart. He gripped Lulu's harness as she stood tall at his side. "You spent 20 years trying to protect a name," Tony said, his voice echoing in the silence. "But a name is just a sound. A legacy is what you do when no one is looking. You failed that test a long time ago." He looked at me, a genuine smile finally breaking through. "Let's go, Mom. We have a foundation to launch." As we walked out, the silence was broken by a deafening roar of applause. The nurses, the residents, the janitors, they weren't cheering for a Daves, they were cheering for a Rossi. In the parking lot, I saw Mom and Dad being escorted to a taxi. No town car, no driver, just 2 elderly people clutching designer bags, looking smaller than they ever had in my nightmares. Ralph sat on the curb, his head in his hands, realizing even the bribe money was gone. "Is it over?" I asked Lance. "Not quite," he said, looking at a folder. "We still have the gala tomorrow night, the one where we announce the scholarships, and I think it's time we let the world see Claire's final gift."
The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of crystal and white orchids. It was the same room where Mom and Dad had hosted countless galas to polish their image. But tonight, the air felt different. It didn't smell like sandalwood and ego. It smelled like hope. I stood at the edge of the stage, my hand resting on Lulu's silken head. Beside me, Lance squeezed my hand. "They're here," he whispered. I looked toward the back. Mom and Dad were standing in the crowd. They weren't at the head table tonight. Their Chanel and their watches looked like armor that had finally been pierced. The room didn't part for them anymore. Tony stepped up to the podium. He didn't look like a prodigy. He looked like a man who had finally found his home. 20 years ago, Tony began, his voice steady and clear. A 17-year-old girl was told she was a disgrace. She was handed a suitcase and 10 minutes to disappear. The people who gave her that ultimatum believed that legacy was something you inherited through blood and bank accounts. The room went silent. I saw Mom's hand tremble. "But they were wrong," Tony continued. "Legacy is a choice. It's the choice Claire made when she saw a girl shivering in a park. It's the choice my mother made to work 3 jobs so I could have my first stethoscope." He signaled to the screen behind him. "Tonight we are launching a sanctuary, the Elena Rossi Foundation. These centers will provide housing and medical scholarships for young women who have been told they are disgraces. They will never have to choose between their child and their future." The applause was a roar that shook the chandeliers. In the middle of the standing ovation, I watched Mom and Dad quietly slip out the side exit. No one followed them. No cameras flashed. They were ghosts in a room full of living, breathing purpose. Tony walked off the stage and pulled me into a hug. For the first time in 20 years, the weight in my chest was completely gone. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. Lulu nudged her way between us, her long nose poking at Tony's hand until he laughed. We walked out of that ballroom together, the chef, the surgeon, the lawyer, and the silver dog. We didn't need the Dave's name. We had something much stronger. We had the family we chose.